By the time I reached 38 weeks, everything was supposed to be ready. The nursery was finished. The hospital bag sat by the front door, double-checked and repacked more times than I cared to. "Just call when it's time," my mom had said more than once. "We'll drop everything. Don't worry about a thing." I hadn't wanted to lean on them. Years of emotional distance had taught me how to function without that kind of safety net. But this felt different. This was childbirth. This was serious. I let myself believe they'd show up when it counted. In the final weeks, they stopped by more often than usual. My dad helped assemble the crib. My mom filled our freezer with casseroles and asked how I was feeling, like she'd just discovered what checking in looked like. They smiled wide, too wide smiles whenever neighbors asked about the baby. I caught them rehearsing their roles as involved grandparents like actors learning their lines. But I let it slide. I didn't care about the performance, only the follow-through. We had conversations about logistics, who would stay with my son, how they'd get to the hospital if I went into labor at night, what they'd do if I couldn't reach them right away. Every conversation ended the same way. "We're ready whenever you are." I clung to that sentence like it was a guarantee. Maybe because deep down, I already knew better. There was history, after all. Years of small letdowns dressed up as forgetfulness, canceled holidays with last-minute excuses, forgotten birthdays that only got mentioned when someone else brought them up first, missed school events they always swore they'd written down, but somehow didn't make it to. Most of my adult life had been an exercise in managing expectations where they were concerned. I'd learned to keep the bar low, to give them enough space to fail without making them fully own it. That was our unspoken agreement. They'd do the bare minimum, and I wouldn't call it what it was. But this felt like the one thing they couldn't possibly get wrong. When I first told them about the pregnancy, their reaction caught me off guard. My dad joked about building a rocking chair for the nursery. My mom arrived with boxes of old baby clothes she'd saved from when I was little. They talked about weekend visits, and started referring to themselves as Grandma and Grandpa, like they'd been waiting their whole lives for this. I let myself believe them. As my due date crept closer, I started sending weekly updates. Small things at first. Doctor's appointments, the baby's weight, notes about the Braxton Hicks contractions that were getting stronger by the day. Their replies came quickly, full of exclamation points and heart emojis. More enthusiasm than I'd seen from them in years. "We're counting down with you," my mom texted one Friday morning after my 37-week checkup. "Let us know the second anything starts." I sent back a smiley face and tried to ignore the tightness building in my chest, because even with all the positivity, cracks were already showing. There was the Saturday they canceled plans to help install the car seat because they'd scored last-minute concert tickets. The Sunday they skipped our lunch date so they could drive out to the lake with friends, saying the weather wouldn't stay this nice for long. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that none of it would matter when the real moment came. They'd step up. I repeated that to myself like a prayer, because I needed to believe it. The week I reached 39 weeks, the air thickened with late summer humidity. Every surface felt sticky, and the heaviness settled on my skin like a second layer I couldn't shake off. I spent most days pacing the house, ankles swollen, lower back aching in ways I hadn't thought possible. Every small cramp pulled my focus. Every shift in pressure made me pause, one hand instinctively pressing against my belly, the other reaching for my phone just in case. I kept my parents updated like clockwork. Morning texts, appointment summaries, even photos of the hospital bag lined up by the door, staged and ready to grab at a moment's notice. My mom answered with her usual overbright cheer. "Almost there. We're ready whenever you need us." Her replies always included heart emojis and exclamation points like she was narrating a Hallmark countdown. My dad was more restrained, usually sending just a thumbs up or a short one-liner that sounded more like an afterthought than reassurance. I told myself it didn't matter, that they'd show up when it counted. On Thursday night, I called to confirm everything one last time. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I kept the phone pressed tight to my ear while Daniel played with toy cars at my feet. "If I go into labor overnight," I said, keeping my tone casual, even though the question lodged like a stone in my throat, "you're still good to come stay with him, right?" "Of course," my mom answered without hesitation. "You don't even have to ask. We're already packed. Bags are by the door." I wanted to believe her. Let myself believe her. For the first time in weeks, I managed to fall asleep without waking every hour. Friday morning started like any other. I made breakfast for Daniel, checked my emails, and tried to ignore the low, steady ache that had settled in my abdomen. By mid-morning, the contractions became harder to dismiss. Not sharp yet, but there, persistent, coming 5 minutes apart and holding. At 10:13 a.m., I called my parents. No answer. I waited 7 minutes before trying again. Left a voicemail this time. Followed it with 2 quick texts just to cover all bases. By 11:30, the contractions had shifted from uncomfortable to sharp. I sat on the living room floor, trying to slow my breathing and pressing my forehead to my knees, while Daniel sat nearby, his eyes wide and uncertain. At 11:45, I picked up the phone again. This time, the call went straight to voicemail. No ring, no chance to leave a new message. I texted once more. I think it's time. Please answer. I need you to come get Daniel. When noon came and went with no reply, panic began to set in. Desperation blurred into disbelief as I started scrolling through every possible backup plan. I called my neighbor. No answer. Tried a coworker who lived 10 minutes away. Straight to voicemail. With each unanswered call, my heart beat faster, and my contractions closed in tighter. By 12:30, my mind was cycling between fight and freeze. I opened Facebook. Not because I expected answers there, but because distraction felt easier than sitting in panic. Half ready to post in a local mom group asking for emergency help, I let my thumb scroll without thinking. That's when I saw it. A friend of my mom's had posted a photo. My parents, seated at a lakeside restaurant, both wearing sunglasses, both smiling like the weight of the world had never touched them, drinks in hand. The caption read, "Weekend getaway with the best company." For a long moment I couldn't move. My throat tightened. My hands shook as I scrolled further. Just below, another post from a different friend showed a new angle of the same scene. Same timestamp, same location. They weren't nearby. They weren't sitting by the phone with bags packed and keys ready. They weren't waiting for my call. They were hours away, unreachable, by choice. A fresh contraction hit, worse than the last. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe through it while Daniel crawled into my lap, his voice small and worried as he asked if I was okay. I nodded, not because it was true, but because I didn't know what else to do. I grabbed his small backpack and texted my neighbor one last time. When she didn't answer, I grabbed my car keys with shaking hands. Buckling Daniel into the back seat felt like moving through wet cement, each motion burning in slow, deliberate pulls. By the time I backed out of the driveway, my contractions were less than 3 minutes apart. I drove to the hospital with one hand gripping the steering wheel and the other pressed against my stomach, whispering short, broken prayers at every red light, every turn, every stretch of road that still lay ahead. We made it. Barely. But we made it. Labor came faster than I expected. Harder, too. By the time I pulled into the hospital parking lot, the contractions were hitting like waves with no space between them. I barely remember getting from the car to triage. A nurse took Daniel's hand and promised to keep him entertained while they rushed me to a delivery room. There wasn't time for an epidural. No time for formal questions or second opinions. Just nurses moving fast, voices layered over each other, and my body pushing forward whether I was ready or not. Somewhere between one contraction and the next, the truth settled with brutal clarity. I was doing this alone. No one holding my hand. No one pacing the hallway. No family in the waiting room. Just me and a team of strangers moving on instinct and training. When Daniel's name flashed across my phone screen mid-labor, one of the nurses answered for me. It was my neighbor, finally home, and realizing what was happening. She offered to pick him up and keep him overnight. Between pushes, I managed to croak out a yes. By the time my daughter arrived, I was too exhausted to cry. I held her against my chest, listened to her first fierce, determined cries, and stared at the ceiling like I was waiting for some delayed wave of relief that never came. Hours later, in the hospital recovery room, I checked my phone. 2 missed calls from my neighbor. 3 congratulatory texts from coworkers who'd seen my quick birth announcement. Nothing from my parents. Around noon the next day, my mom finally texted. Not a call, not a visit, just a casual line of emojis and poorly punctuated cheer. Hope everything went okay. We're still up at the lake. Let us know when you're home and settled. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I locked the phone, placed it face down on the bedside table, and turned away from it. For once, I let the disappointment land where it belonged. Not in my chest, not in my throat, but squarely on them. That afternoon, while my daughter slept against my shoulder and Daniel colored quietly by the window, I opened my banking app and scrolled to the monthly auto transfer I'd been sending them for the last 3 years. I clicked cancel. Then I turned off my phone, pulled the hospital blanket tighter around both my kids, and let myself drift into sleep without a single thought spared for them. The following week passed in a fog of feedings, diaper changes, and recovery pains that made climbing the stairs feel like a small victory. My body ached in ways I hadn't prepared for. My sleep came in uneven bursts, fractured by cries and hunger cues, and the relentless cycle of newborn care. But every time I held my daughter against my chest, something inside me settled, something that hadn't settled for months. My parents stayed silent. No visits, no follow-up calls, not even a text asking when they could come by to meet her. And this time, I didn't wonder why. On the 5th day home, while I rocked the baby in one arm and scrolled through my phone with the other, my banking app pinged with a reminder about the next scheduled transfer. For the past 3 years, that transfer had sent $1,200 into their account at the start of every month without fail. Seeing it now felt almost surreal. The math of it stood out in sharp relief. The years of stretching my budget to cover theirs. The times I'd put off buying things I needed so they wouldn't fall behind on their mortgage or miss a car payment. I'd done it quietly, without fanfare, because that's what family was supposed to do. Except when I needed them most, they hadn't been there at all. I stared at the confirmation screen for a long moment, thumb hovering over the cancel button like it was something fragile or dangerous. Then I tapped. No second guessing. No warning text to them. Just done. That weekend, the first text came from my dad. "Hey, your mom said the payment didn't go through. Can you check on that?" I read it once, then put the phone down without replying. 2 days later, another message arrived. "Not sure what's going on, but we really need that this month." Then one from my mom. "Sweetheart, we noticed something with the bank. Is everything okay? Should we come by and talk?" I didn't answer any of them. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. For the first time in a long while, I didn't owe them an explanation. The next text arrived with a different tone. "We've always been there for you. Don't forget that. Family doesn't just cut each other off over a misunderstanding." I read it twice, then set the phone down again and went back to folding laundry. My daughter's tiny onesies were still warm from the dryer, soft in my hands, grounding in a way their words never had been. By the middle of the following week, the shift became unmistakable. The soft guilt trips gave way to sharper edges. My dad sent one that simply read, "I hope you're proud of yourself." My mom followed with something that tried to sound wounded, but landed bitter. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I muted both numbers. That didn't stop them. By Friday, the cousins started reaching out. First came Lisa. "Hey, your mom emailed the family. I don't know what's going on, but are you okay?" Then Aunt Marianne chimed in. "Your parents are really upset. They said you've cut them off out of nowhere. Is there something we can do to help smooth things over?" Curious, I opened my inbox. There it was. A mass email sent to every relative whose contact information they had managed to save over the years. The subject line read, "Family Update." In the body, they painted themselves as heartbroken, confused, and deeply hurt by my sudden decision to cut ties and financial support. They described me as distant and emotionally unstable after the birth. They even suggested that postpartum hormones were clouding my judgment and making me act irrationally. There was no mention of the missed calls, no mention of the unanswered texts, no reference to the photos of them laughing on a lakeside patio, while I labored alone in a hospital room with no one by my side. Reading it didn't make me angry. Not really. It made me tired. Tired in a way that felt like it had been settling in for years, curling deep into my bones, waiting for me to finally notice just how long I'd been carrying their version of the truth. I sat at the kitchen table, my daughter asleep in the bassinet beside me, and opened a new email draft. Subject: Setting the record straight. To everyone who's reached out, and to anyone else reading this, I hadn't planned on saying anything. I figured the silence spoke for itself, but after seeing the email my parents sent, I think it's time for clarity. On Friday, July 14th at 10:13 a.m., I called both of their phones. No answer. At 10:20, I called again, and left a voicemail. At 10:35 and again at 10:50, I sent texts letting them know I was in labor and needed them to come get Daniel so I could get to the hospital safely. By 11:30, after no response, I started calling neighbors and co-workers for help. At 12:30, while contractions were 3 minutes apart, I saw photos on Facebook of both of them at Lakeside Grill, 2 hours away, drinks in hand, smiling, celebrating, completely unreachable. I drove myself to the hospital in active labor, with my toddler in the back seat. There were no phone calls, no visits, not that day, not the next. For 3 years before that, I sent them $1,200 a month, covering groceries, car payments, and every so-called emergency. I never asked for anything in return, so if anyone's confused about why I cut them off, this is why. You're welcome to believe whatever version makes you feel better, but this is the truth. I hit send. When my phone started buzzing again minutes later, I silenced it. Not just for the day, for good. The email didn't take long to ripple. By the next morning, my inbox looked different. Some cousins sent quiet thank you messages. One aunt, who'd stayed mostly silent for years, simply replied, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." Others didn't respond at all, but a few doubled down. A text from my uncle arrived mid-afternoon. "We're all going through things. Don't punish your parents for one bad weekend." A Facebook comment popped up under an older post from a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. "Family doesn't air dirty laundry like this." I didn't answer any of them. Not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood I didn't owe them more of mine. My parents, on the other hand, stayed quiet. No new messages. No late-night voicemails. Nothing. For a few days, I wondered if they were letting it go. But on Thursday afternoon, I opened my email to find a long, rambling letter from my mom. The subject line read, "You'll regret this." I didn't read past the first paragraph. The phrases I caught were enough to fill in the rest. "After all we've done. Ungrateful. Breaking this family apart. People are starting to ask questions." I clicked delete before my stomach could twist any tighter. After that, I blocked both of their email addresses. Then I opened my phone, scrolled to their contact names, and hit block there too. There was no ceremony to it, no dramatic music. Just a small, quiet relief as their numbers disappeared from my screen. That night, I sat on the porch with my daughter asleep in my arms, and Daniel drawing chalk hearts at my feet. The air was cool. The street stayed quiet. The sun slipped lower behind the trees. I was done. 2 weeks later, I stood in the middle of my living room, staring at the sagging couch cushions and the threadbare rug, and realized how long I'd been putting things off. It wasn't just the furniture. It was everything. Plans I never started. Joy I kept postponing. Even the quiet, daily maintenance of a life that felt like mine had been left undone. The auto transfer I'd canceled still sat in my budget, untouched like a ghost of old obligations. Extra breathing room I hadn't dared spend on myself. Until now. That afternoon, after dropping Daniel off for his first day at the local preschool program I could finally afford, I bundled my daughter into the car and drove across town to the home goods store. This time, I didn't walk past the things I wanted. I picked out a new rug with colors that made the room feel less tired, chose curtains soft enough to catch the morning light, bought a lamp that made the living room glow warmer at night. For the first time since she was born, I ordered takeout without weighing it against the week's grocery list 3 different times. Later that evening, I stood near the front door, waiting for the delivery driver, and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I didn't look like someone waiting for an apology anymore. I looked like someone making space for something better. Before going to bed, I opened my phone and scrolled through my blocked contacts. Their names were still there, sitting in the list like questions I hadn't answered. Without pausing, I tapped delete contact for both of them. Not to erase them, not to pretend none of it happened, just to free myself from the expectation that they'd ever become someone different. I turned off my phone, switched off the lights, let the house settle around me with a kind of stillness that felt earned. The following weeks slipped into a rhythm both unfamiliar and right. Mornings blurred into afternoons filled with bottles to prepare, diapers to change, and Daniel tugging on my sleeve to show me every crayon drawing like each one was a masterpiece. I found small pockets of peace where I hadn't expected them, rocking my daughter to sleep during midday naps, sitting with Daniel on the porch steps while he pointed out every passing car, listening to the quiet hum of the house at night without the sharp edge of waiting for another guilt-laced message. Without their constant expectations, or their drain on my budget, money stretched further than it had in years. The first month I didn't send that auto transfer. I bought a new stroller without checking my account balance 3 times. The next month, I replaced the broken washing machine that had been rattling its way through cycles like it might quit mid-spin at any moment. I opened the windows more often, let the air move freely through the rooms, sat on the floor with both kids, surrounded by toys and laundry, and didn't rush to make it look like something else for anyone else. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and soft congratulations. I let them in without apologizing for the clutter near the door or the unfolded blankets on the couch. I didn't feel like I owed anyone a polished version of my life. I didn't check their social media pages. I didn't reread their old messages. When well-meaning relatives called or texted to check in, I kept my replies short and polite, letting the conversations fade without guilt. I wasn't interested in defending my choices anymore. By the end of the month, I had scheduled part-time childcare with the extra money and picked up a few freelance projects from home. Nothing overwhelming, just enough to remind myself that I still had something to offer beyond survival mode. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch with my daughter sleeping against my chest, and Daniel running circles in the front yard with a neighbor's kid, it hit me. I hadn't thought about my parents at all that day. Not once. The first time I took both kids to the park alone, the late afternoon sun hung low enough to cast long, gold-tinted shadows across the playground. Daniel headed straight for the swings, pumping his legs hard enough to lift himself almost parallel with the sky before I even had time to sit down. His voice carried across the field, full of that wide, unfiltered excitement kids have when they still believe the world is cheering for them. My daughter stayed curled in the carrier against me, her tiny fingers knotted in the fabric of my shirt like she already knew this world required her to hold on tight. I ran my palm over her back, slow and steady, feeling the rise and fall of her breath anchor both of us to the moment. I sank onto the nearest bench, letting the sun settle into my skin, and felt something shift in my chest. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't waiting. Not for a phone notification, not for the low-grade anxiety that used to live just beneath my ribs. Always waiting to flare at the next guilt-laced message or backhanded text. When I checked my phone, there was nothing from them. No missed calls, no vague half-apology texts, no emails with subject lines like "let's talk" or "family is forever." And for once, the silence didn't sting. It didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like a door closing, and behind that door, something softer waited, something I hadn't made room for until now. That night, after the kids were asleep, I stood at the kitchen counter with a pen in one hand and the grocery list in the other, somewhere between jotting down milk and cereal. I flipped the page and started a second list. This one wasn't for the fridge. It was for me. Things I wanted to do next month. Sign Daniel up for swim lessons. Take the baby for her first pediatric checkup. Call the plumber about the leak under the sink. Find a used bookshelf for the living room. Email the freelance client back about the new project. Small things, manageable things, my things. Their names didn't appear anywhere on that list. Not as a call to make. Not as a visit to schedule. Not even as a quiet mental note to check their social pages out of habit. For the first time, I let that decision sit there, undecorated, unapologetic, fully mine. Later, curled up on the couch with a blanket pulled tight around my legs, I scrolled through old photos on my phone. Daniel's first steps, the ultrasound printout from this pregnancy, the blurry hospital room selfie I took after she was born, swollen-eyed, exhausted, holding her close for the first time. I paused on that one, not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. I let the photo linger on the screen for a few extra seconds before closing the gallery. Then I set the phone face down on the coffee table and pulled the blanket higher, just full enough to feel like mine.